She was a quiet, reserved black girl with a heart full of unspoken thoughts. One day she left a handwritten note on a stranger's car. He was a shattered millionaire, cloaked in silence and sorrow. But her words pierced through his darkness, igniting a love he never expected to feel again. A warm embrace to all of you joining us today. I'm truly honored by your presence. My name is James, and I'm your storyteller for this evening. I hope your heart is calm, your mind is peaceful, and your spirit feels held by love. Before we dive into today's heartfelt tale, could I ask one small favor? Please subscribe and hit that bell icon so stories like this one always find their way to you. Let me know, where are you tuning in from? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear what part of the world your heart calls home. And now let's pause. Take a breath. May love, peace, and healing gently wrap around your life like a prayer. Let's begin. You don't know me, but your calm gives me peace, she wrote at the top, then hesitated. Her pen hovered in midair. Was that too forward? Too strange? Her thumb rubbed the edge of the page, heart thudding faster. Still, she couldn't stop. The words spilled from her like a secret longing. Every day I pass your car, I see you, a man who carries silent weight with quiet dignity. You don't even know it, but your stillness eases something inside me. You make the world seem softer, quieter, gentler. That means something. Maybe this is silly, but I had to tell you. She stared at the letter, her heart laid bare in black ink. It was a letter unlike any she had ever written. Every sentence felt like truth. It wasn't her nature to be this open, especially not with someone like Albert. He was polished, successful, a CEO, everything she wasn't. He probably didn't even notice someone like her, the shy assistant with long braids and small dreams. Still, she had written it. She had dared. She stood in the shaded entrance of the office building, fingers trembling as they held the paper. Without daring to meet his eyes, or anyone else's, she slid the note beneath his windshield wiper, then quickly turned to leave. What if he laughed? Her heart drummed like a warning bell. What if he crumpled it up without even reading it? She didn't look back. She couldn't. Instead, she walked away fast, feet pounding pavement, like maybe she could outrun the swirl in her chest. By the time she got home, her hands still shook, her breath caught in her throat. But she'd done it. She had said what she felt, and though her heart beat wildly, part of her felt strangely free. Albert Saint had always walked through life with quiet precision. So when he returned to his car that evening and saw the note under the wiper, he almost dismissed it. People often left notes, business cards, invitations, scribbled compliments. But something about this paper felt different, neater, more deliberate. He paused, then bent down slowly and picked it up. The moment his eyes fell on the words, he stilled. You don't know me, but your calm gives me peace. The line echoed in his head like a whisper he hadn't known he needed to hear. Albert read the rest slowly, carefully, as if absorbing more than words, like absorbing someone's truth. This wasn't shallow flattery, it was raw, honest. He read, Every day I pass your car, I see you, a man who carries silent weight. And something inside him cracked. Whoever this was, she had seen him. Not his job, not his suit, him. The ache in his chest deepened, strange and unfamiliar. His fingers tightened around the paper. He reread the final sentence. Maybe this is foolish, but I had to tell you. It hit harder than it should have. Maybe it was the way it was written. No pretense, no agenda. Just sincerity. He hadn't felt that in years. Albert folded the note carefully and slid it into his coat pocket. It stayed there like a memory he didn't want to forget. And for the first time in a very long time, the loneliness didn't feel so sharp. That night, her words followed him home. He thought about the girl with the note, the girl with the braids he'd seen once or twice, always keeping her distance. Quiet, observant. He didn't even know her name, but now he couldn't stop thinking about her. What kind of person sees past your mask and speaks straight to your heart without even knowing you? He didn't have answers, but he knew something inside him had shifted, and he didn't want to ignore it. The next day, Albert stood outside the cafe near his office for hours. He wasn't sure what he was waiting for, until he saw her. She was walking by his car again, eyes on the pavement, unaware she was being watched. Her long braids shimmered in the afternoon light, and her quiet presence pulled him in. He didn't even think before stepping forward. "Excuse me," he said softly. She froze mid-step, breath catching in her throat. Slowly she turned. Their eyes met, hers wide, uncertain, his steady, searching. Time stilled. Then he spoke, voice low but sincere. "I read your note," he said, "and it touched me, in a way I can't describe." Her cheeks turned crimson, lips parting with surprise. She hadn't expected this, any of it. But this was the moment she'd dreamed of, the one she'd never believed could be real. And now, here it was. There they stood, shy girl and guarded man, under the soft kiss of rain, caught in a moment neither had planned. His coat soaked slowly at the shoulders, but Albert didn't move. He watched her walk under the gray sky, gripping her jacket like armor. Her braids shimmered like midnight silk. Then he spoke again, gently but with gravity. "Did you write something for me?" The question sliced through the silence like light through clouds. She stopped. Her world narrowed to that one moment. Everything around her, the cars, the rain, the noise, disappeared. Slowly she turned toward him, eyes wide. She nodded, barely, carefully, like the moment might vanish if she moved too fast. He stepped closer, slow and respectful. "That note," he said softly, "was the kindest thing I've ever received." His voice cracked slightly, and in it, she heard a kind of hurt she hadn't expected. She didn't know what to say, but Albert understood. Her silence wasn't rejection, it was honesty. So he smiled gently, lips curling in a way that looked like the first sunrise after a long storm. Rain fell in soft sheets between them, and for a moment it felt like the world gave them space to just be. His mind didn't race. It stilled. Her presence calmed him. How had she seen him so clearly? It was a mystery, but one he didn't want to escape. "I don't think you know what that note meant to me," he said. "I've been through a lot, and I didn't think anyone could see who I really was anymore." She finally spoke, soft, sincere. "I see you. I always have." Her words were simple, but they hit him like a wave. Not romantic, not grand, but intimate, soul deep. Her eyes lifted, their gazes locked, and Albert saw something in her, something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. "What's your name?" he asked, voice quiet. She hesitated, then whispered, "Shirley." The way she said it, delicate, uncertain, tugged at something in him. "Shirley," he repeated slowly, like a promise. "I'm Albert." She nodded, like she'd known all along, just needed to hear it from him. "I didn't think you'd even see it," she murmured. "Didn't think you'd care." He laughed softly, a sound that felt new even to him. "I didn't think anyone wrote things like that anymore." She looked down, unsure how to carry such beautiful words. "I didn't mean to intrude," she added quickly. But Albert shook his head. "You didn't. You did the opposite. You opened a door I thought was locked for good." Albert appeared, his tall frame silhouetted against the amber sky, one hand in his coat pocket, the other holding that same black umbrella, though it wasn't raining. Shirley's breath hitched. He was here. He had meant it. They didn't speak at first, didn't need to. He simply stepped beside her again, his presence like an old, familiar melody that neither of them knew they'd memorized. This time, when their eyes met, she didn't look away. Neither did he. "Hi," she said softly. And it wasn't just a greeting. It was a beginning. Albert's lips curved slightly, but his eyes carried the weight of something deeper. "Hi." They started walking again, step by step, like dancers relearning a song. The silence between them was no longer filled with hesitance, but with quiet understanding. It was as if the city had softened its edges just for them. After a few blocks, Albert paused. "Would you—" He stopped, cleared his throat, trying again with more care, more honesty. "Would you like to sit somewhere with me for a while? I know a spot nearby. It's quiet." Shirley hesitated. not out of fear, but out of the fragile beauty of the moment. Then she nodded. Okay. He led her to a small rooftop garden atop a nearby building, hidden, tender, full of potted lavender and climbing ivy. There were no grand lights, just string bulbs swaying gently in the breeze. A wooden bench waited near the edge where the city lights shimmered like spilled stars. They sat not too close, but not apart either. Shirley wrapped her hands around her knees, while Albert leaned forward, his elbows on his thighs, the silence now wrapped in soft safety. I used to think loneliness was strength, Albert said, his voice hushed, like confiding in the night itself. That needing someone meant I'd failed at something. She turned to look at him, the vulnerability in his voice not just striking, but welcoming. And now? She asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out her first note. The paper was creased, softened by touch, treasured. Now I know it just meant I hadn't been seen yet. Shirley blinked against the warmth rising in her eyes. I wasn't trying to fix anything, she said. I just saw you. And maybe I wanted you to see me too. Albert looked at her then, not as the CEO, not as the man who built skyscrapers and held empires in his grip, but as the man who had finally let someone in. I do, he said simply. I see you. And just like that, the silence between them became sacred. That night when they parted, he didn't try to kiss her. She didn't expect him to, but their hands brushed, lingered, and in that brief, brave moment, her fingers slid against his, not clasping, not holding, but promising. The next morning, neither of them knew where this would go, but both knew one thing. It had already begun. She heard the quiet tread of his footsteps behind her. Turning slightly, her eyes met his, and she gave a shy, soft smile. He smiled back but said nothing, because he didn't need to. Over the next days, their meetings became a ritual. With them came more notes, exchanged like secrets, folded like fragile wings. Shirley's handwriting grew bolder with each one, not in size but in emotion. Her words painted landscapes of hope and softness. One note read, "Some days I feel invisible, like my thoughts are birds no one else hears. But when I write to you, it's like they land somewhere safe." Albert carried that note in his coat pocket for days. In return, he wrote, "I used to feel powerful in boardrooms, but now I feel more alive reading your words than I ever did closing a deal." Their words weren't just ink on paper. They became threads, sewing two lives together, slowly, delicately. In her notes, Shirley began to share pieces of her world. Her love for books where quiet girls became heroes, her habit of humming when she cooked, her fear of being too much in a world that didn't make space for softness. And Albert shared too, his fear of betrayal, the time he trusted someone who only wanted his wealth, the loneliness that clung to his nights like cold air. Even in rooms full of people, every letter deepened the space between them, not with distance, but with meaning. Until one chilly morning, Shirley handed him a note that felt different. Her hands trembled slightly as she passed it to him, her eyes not quite meeting his. He waited until later to read it, sitting alone on a bench beneath golden autumn leaves. Inside the folded paper were only a few words, but they hit like lightning wrapped in silk. "I wish I could be brave enough to love you out loud." His chest tightened. The words echoed inside him, making his world slow. Not because he hadn't felt it too, but because she'd finally said it, even if just in writing. That evening, when they met again, he didn't wait. He didn't speak at first. Instead, he stepped closer to her than usual. Shirley looked up, her eyes wide with uncertainty, her body still as the wind teased the loose strands of her braids. Slowly, gently, he reached for her hand. She flinched, not in fear, but in surprise. No one had ever taken her hand like that, as if asking permission with every movement. He held it, his fingers wrapping around hers not to possess, but to anchor, to reassure, to promise. "Then let me help you be brave," he said softly. His voice was a whisper, but it carried more weight than anything she'd ever heard. Shirley stood frozen for a breath, then another. Her cheeks flushed, her lips parted slightly, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she tightened her fingers around his, just slightly. just enough. It was the smallest gesture, but for her, it was everything. They stood like that for minutes that stretched into an eternity neither of them wanted to end. The world moved around them. Cars passed, wind danced, somewhere a dog barked. But within their shared space, time bent around the warmth blooming between two people who had never known how to say all they felt. Until now. Shirley smiled, her eyes bright with something unnamed. And though her hand trembled, she didn't let go. She couldn't. She didn't want to. And Albert, he felt something in him crack open fully, a door that had been bolted shut for years. Behind that door, there was hope, and it wore braids, carried paper dreams, and smiled like a sunrise. They stayed hand in hand until the sky turned from gold to soft blue, until the streetlights flickered on and cast gentle halos above their heads. Still holding her hand, Albert asked if she'd like to join him somewhere the next evening. Not a grand date or a lavish invitation, but something quieter, more intimate, something that matched the rhythm of the world they were building between them. Shirley nodded, her eyes still wide, still unsure of what she was becoming around him, but trusting, following. And so the next evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, casting warm hues across glass towers and whispering secrets into the breeze, Albert stood at the top of his building in a private rooftop garden. Hidden from the noise below, it was a peaceful oasis wrapped in ivy and soft lantern light, where benches were carved from smooth stone and flowers bloomed like dreams in quiet corners. In the center sat a simple wooden table, two chairs, and a single pot of tea steaming gently beside delicate porcelain cups. He wore no suit that night, no expensive watch, no mask of the man the world called powerful. Just a soft navy sweater, sleeves rolled to his forearms, his hair tousled by the wind, a heartbeat in his throat louder than any applause he'd ever received. And when Shirley stepped onto the rooftop, her breath caught, not because it was grand, but because it was him, all of him, standing vulnerable in the stillness, offering her the peace of something real, something slow, something hers. She wore a pale yellow dress that danced with the breeze, her braids pinned back in a way that made her seem like the calm after rain. And Albert smiled, just once, just for her, as he guided her to the table with a hand gently resting at the small of her back. Never pushing, only offering. She sat shyly, smoothing her skirt, her eyes flickering to him in a way like candlelight, afraid of being seen. He poured her tea with steady hands, then his, and spoke not a word, for silence had become their shared language, a love language that didn't need noise to be profound. As she lifted her cup, she found it, tucked beneath the saucer, a folded note, the paper thick, cream-colored, written in his careful, elegant script. She paused, her fingers trembling slightly as they brushed the edge, lifting it as if it might vanish in the wind. With her heart in her throat, she opened it, reading slowly, word by word, her lips parting, breath catching. I don't know what I expected the day I first saw your note, but I never imagined you'd become the ache I treasure, the quiet I crave, the heartbeat I follow. In a world full of noise, may I love you with all that I am. And something inside her cracked wide open, something tender and aching, because no one had ever asked to love her with such softness, with such sincerity. She couldn't stop the tears that welled up, silent and shimmering, slipping down her cheeks like raindrops on glass. She looked up at him with eyes full of wonder, full of fear, and full of something she didn't have a name for yet, but was ready to feel. Her voice barely made it past her lips. Yes, but I'm scared. Her confession, small and fragile, like the edge of a dream. Albert didn't flinch, didn't look away, didn't ask her to be more than she was. He simply leaned in, reaching up to gently cup her face in both hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears. And in the softest voice he had ever spoken, he said, "Then we'll take it slow. Just promise you'll stay." And in that moment, with the city glowing behind them and the scent of night-blooming jasmine wrapping around them like silk, Shirley nodded, not because the fear had left, but because she trusted him enough to carry it with her. Then, with every nerve in her body alive, every thought spinning, and still at once, he leaned forward, his forehead resting gently against hers. They breathed the same breath for one suspended heartbeat, and finally, he kissed her. A kiss not of urgency, but of reverence. Soft and hesitant and warm. The kind of kiss that asked nothing and gave everything. Shirley, though startled by the newness of it, the intimacy of feeling lips meet lips for the first time, melted into him slowly, like a snowflake on warm skin. Letting herself lean, letting herself be held. Her fingers lifted to grip the front of his sweater, anchoring herself to a reality she still couldn't believe was hers. It was her first kiss, and it was his first in years that meant something more than momentary escape. It lingered, not just in the rooftop air, but deep in the marrow of them both, as if sealing something that had already been written in their souls. When they pulled back, neither said a word, because nothing needed saying, not when her cheeks were flushed with more than shyness, not when his eyes searched hers like someone seeing stars for the first time after decades in darkness. He held her then, both of them sitting side by side, his arm draped carefully around her shoulders, her head tucked beneath his chin. They watched the city come alive with lights below, the wind kissing their skin and carrying the scent of roses and hope. They didn't rush, didn't speak of tomorrows, just stayed, letting the closeness weave a new kind of silence between them, one filled with unspoken promises and healing. A love that began not in grand gestures, but in the quiet choice to remain, to try, to begin something brave together. In that stillness, with her small hand wrapped in his and his chin resting atop her crown, Albert knew, with a clarity he hadn't felt in years, that this was no fleeting chapter, no curious detour. This was the start of a life being rewritten by the gentle power of a woman who had first spoken through notes, and now through the tremble of a kiss. Small outdoor kitchen became sacred rituals of togetherness. They learned each other not in haste but in harmony. How Shirley liked her mangoes chilled and sliced thin. How Albert hummed softly while reading. How she sometimes stared at the ocean like she was listening to secrets it only told her. And Albert, once all steel and silence, found himself softened by her wonder, shaped into someone gentler simply by the way she looked at him as if he were not a tycoon, not a man hardened by betrayal, but just a soul worthy of being loved. One evening, as the horizon bled into lavender and fire, Albert sat on the porch steps while Shirley braided tiny wildflowers into a crown. She set it on his head with a mischievous grin, and he, laughing, truly laughing, let it stay. "You look very regal," she teased, brushing her fingers through his hair. "A king of tenderness." He caught her hand then, brought it to his lips, and murmured, "Only because you made me one." And so it went. Days melting into one another like watercolors, until even time seemed to pause for them. On their last night on the island, Shirley found a small envelope tucked beneath her pillow. Inside was a handwritten letter on thick cream paper. It read, "My dearest Shirley, before you, I knew how to conquer markets, not mornings. I knew how to sign contracts, not create poetry with touch. You've given me a new language, one of stillness, laughter, and belonging. This island will fade. These days will end. But you are forever. If you'll have me, let's stop counting what we've built and instead build something that can't be measured. A home, not in walls or wealth, but in hearts, in glances, in the way we reach for each other in the dark." Her hands trembled as she folded the letter, heart pounding like wings. And when she turned to find Albert already kneeling, not with grandeur, but quiet reverence, holding out a simple ring shaped like a vine of gold, with a single diamond nestled like a dewdrop, she didn't hesitate. "Yes," she whispered, before he could even ask. "To every yesterday that led us here, and every tomorrow we'll write." He stood and pulled her close, and under the island's moon, they kissed, not as lovers newly infatuated, but as soulmates who had found home in each other. And in that moment, the world didn't spin. It sighed. Shirley felt the world dissolve into nothing but his warmth, his scent, his quiet strength. They swayed slowly, chest to chest, the city lights below them like galaxies scattered at their feet. Her head tucked under his chin, his heartbeat steady against her cheek, she whispered, "I've never felt this safe." Albert pressed a kiss to her temple and murmured, "It's because this time, love didn't ask you to shrink. It asked you to soar." Then the music faded into silence, and for a breathless moment, the rooftop became a sanctuary carved out of time. Albert pulled back slightly, just enough to look into her eyes, and, with a reverence that made her knees soften, he reached into his pocket, not with haste or nerves, but with the calm certainty of a man who had already chosen forever. He didn't kneel, not because it wasn't romantic, but because this wasn't about tradition. This was about two equals, two souls, two journeys converging into one. Instead, he simply took her hand, held it to his chest, and opened a small velvet box between them. Inside, nestled against midnight blue satin, was a ring, not extravagant, but breathtaking. A single diamond encircled by tiny etchings of constellations, symbols of every place they had been together. "I didn't fall in love with you, Shirley," Albert said, his voice low and steady. "I walked into love with you, step by step, word by word, laugh by laugh. And tonight, I'm not asking you to be mine. I'm asking you to let me be yours. For every note, every silence, every tomorrow." Tears slipped down her cheeks, and for once she didn't try to wipe them away. She just let them fall, her heart wide open, unguarded, alive. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she answered, "Yes, 1,000 times, yes." Cheers erupted quietly from hidden corners. Friends, staff, loved ones who had quietly gathered to witness the moment. But Albert and Shirley didn't notice. They were too wrapped in each other, in the infinity that now belonged to them. Later, long after the lights dimmed and the rooftop emptied, they lay curled together on a blanket of stars, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy circles on her arm. No speeches, no cameras, just breaths, heartbeats, and a kind of peace they had both been chasing their entire lives. And as Shirley looked up at him, her engagement ring catching the moonlight like it had caught her hope, she whispered, "This isn't the end of our story, is it?" Albert smiled, pulling her closer, his voice threading through the quiet like silk. "No, my love, this is just the beginning of our forever. Lifetimes." And for a breath, Shirley could only nod, speechless but sure, as tears slipped down her cheeks. Her voice cracked but rang clear when she whispered, "I was yours before I even knew you." The applause that followed didn't come from a crowd. It came from the stars above, winking their approval, from the wind brushing gently around them as if the universe itself sighed in relief. And when Albert slid the ring onto her finger, it wasn't just a promise. It was the closing of a loop, the start of forever. A forever built on quiet notes, on patience, on healing. As the music swelled around them, they danced beneath a canopy of stars and soft lights, surrounded by the quiet magic they had created, woven from time, truth, and unwavering tenderness. When he kissed her hand and murmured, "Thank you for healing me, my poet," Shirley smiled through her tears, not because of the elegance of the moment, but because of the steady, profound love that had taken root between them. Later that night, they curled into each other on a small bench tucked in the rooftop garden Albert had built just for her. They didn't speak of the future in grand terms, but in small, tangible dreams. Flowers on a windowsill. Maybe children, with her giggle, his eyes. A home where notes would still be left on pillows. In that quiet warmth, Shirley realized something deeper. This wasn't a fairy tale or some fleeting dream. This was her life, her extraordinary, breathtaking reality. A life where love wasn't an occasional grand gesture, but a million soft ones offered daily. She nestled closer to Albert, his heartbeat steady against her cheek. When he wrapped his coat around her to shield her from the chill, she thought of that first note she'd left him, meant for no one, expecting nothing. That slip of paper had become the seed of an entire garden. Now, under moonlight and melody, she bloomed beside the man who had read her soul, and responded not with flowers or fame, but with forever. The night after their anniversary, they sat hand in hand on that same rooftop bench. The fairy lights flickered out one by one, swallowed by midnight. Albert whispered into her hair, "Let's not wait for the world to catch up. Let's live ahead of it." No ring could speak louder than the vows already etched into their hearts. But the idea of making it official, solemn and true, began to bloom between them. And so, in the days that followed, they planned. Not a spectacle, but a moment. When the day arrived, Shirley didn't rise in a flurry. She moved with calm grace, breathing evenly as she faced her reflection and smiled at the woman staring back. A woman formed not by riches or recognition, but by love, by truth, by gentle hands that never asked her to be anyone else. Her long braids were crowned with delicate threads of gold, like ribbons of sunlight. She exhaled deeply, heart fluttering, not from nerves, but from the joy of becoming his in every way that mattered. Outside, in a garden hidden behind ivy-covered walls, Albert waited. His suit was a soft gray that muted the sharp edges of his past. His gaze was reverent, steady. The wind and the roses seemed to pause with him as the music began. And when Shirley stepped into view, everything else fell away. Albert didn't see a girl from the streets. He saw his home, his future, the other half of every word he had never known how to say. With every step she took, her dress whispered poetry across the grass, and she felt no fear, only fullness, only truth. When they finally stood face to face, hands finding each other naturally, the small circle of loved ones around them fell into sacred silence. Even they could feel it, a love that didn't need performance. Their vows were not loud, not rehearsed, but written from the marrow. Albert, eyes shining, held her fingers to his chest and whispered, "I don't promise riches or perfection. I promise peace, shelter, honesty, and the strength to hold your heart each day like the gift it is." Shirley, through tears, replied softly, "I won't vow to never falter, but I vow to never stop choosing you, even in silence, even when courage slips. I will find you in every version of forever I carry." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was sacred. Then, with a nod from the officiant, Albert leaned in. The kiss wasn't just soft, it was eternal. A language, a seal. The garden leaned in. Roses bowed. The breeze stilled. The guests didn't cheer wildly. They applauded softly, understanding. This was not a spectacle. This was a symphony. Not an event, an embrace. When Shirley and Albert turned to face their guests, the sun broke through, pouring light like a celestial blessing. Their smiles, his quiet and full of pride, hers radiant and whole, spoke more than words ever could. As they walked down the rose-lined aisle, hands entwined, there was no confetti, no booming music, just petals underfoot, hearts echoing a shared truth. This is real. This is ours. At the garden gate, Albert pulled her into his arms, not for anyone's eyes, just because he could. He whispered, "You weren't just the girl who wrote the first note. You're the woman who rewrote my life." She pressed into him, smiling, and whispered back, "And you're the man who gave my silence a song." They stood like that, simply breathing, until the world gently resumed. They left the garden not as fragments, but whole. Not as a millionaire and a girl from the streets, but as one rhythm, beating, believing, blooming. Their love continued not in grand adventures, but in quiet days lived fully. In burnt dinners, whispered apologies, slow dances in the kitchen, in Sunday breakfasts and bedtime giggles. When they returned home, it was no longer a place of silence. It bloomed. Days passed like petals falling, slow, meaningful. Albert wrote again, not for the world, but for Shirley and for the daughter they would one day raise. Shirley painted rooftops and fairy lights in gardens where roses bowed at the sound of vows. And when spring came and Shirley's body swelled with new life, Albert didn't panic. He knelt, forehead to her belly, and whispered, "You're my miracle, multiplied." He read stories to their unborn child every night. She sang lullabies she made up on the spot. Their home was full before the baby ever arrived. When their daughter was born under moonlight and lavender-scented air, Albert held her as if she were made of light. And from then on, life slowed even more. Fuller. Richer. They traveled less, choosing instead to map the world inside each other. Their mornings began with kisses. Their nights ended with notes. Each anniversary, Albert honored the note that began it all, once turning the library into a paper garden. Another year, a book titled The Girl Who Spoke Through Silence. Shirley always responded with pages of her own, ending every time with, "I'll love you, quietly, fully, forever." Their daughter learned early that love was a ritual. Notes in lunchboxes, eyes that said, "I see you," hands that reached first. And when people asked how they lasted, Albert and Shirley didn't mention grand gestures. They pointed to drawings on the wall, to journals with tear stains, to a pair of shoes left by a door that never closed. Because real love isn't perfect. It's chosen over and over. It's coming home. Even in old age, with Albert's silver beard and Shirley's paint-stained fingers, they were still soulmates, waking each morning in awe that what started with a single note became a lifetime. One winter evening, their granddaughter asked Shirley, "How does love begin?" Shirley held her close, tucked a braid behind her ear, and said, "It begins when someone sees you're quiet and doesn't try to change it." Albert, listening nearby, finished writing the last line of a poem. She was never just a girl with a paper heart. She was the author of mine, and they didn't need applause or a perfect ending. Just each other, just a forever whispered one heartbeat at a time.